And I also ask that you keep your microphones on mute throughout the presentation, just to reduce the background noise for our speaker this morning. The handouts for this session were emailed to you this morning, so you should have them in your email that you used to register with. I'll also put a copy in the chat once the presentation gets started this morning. The recording will be available on the Saskatchewan Genealogy YouTube channel, and I will put that link for you in the chat as well. So as I mentioned to you, our presenter this morning is Jean Ashcroft. Jean is a member of the College of Certified Saskatchewan Genealogists and is a longtime SGS member. After her presentation this morning, Jean will address some questions as time permits. And if you have any questions as we go along, you can type them into the chat and I will pass them on to Jean after the presentation. And Jean, the floor is all yours.
Okay, let's see if I can be technologically accurate here. Let's see. Oh, sure. Let's see if we can't get started at this. There we go. Okay. Thanks for joining us as well, I say. And Diane introduced the topics that I'm covering. Topics that are really helpful in growing our trees, adding some interest to our trees. And so they're actually topics that I'm kind of excited about. As with our other sessions, I'm going to try and give the Saskatchewan focus, although these are topics that are of value to no matter where you're researching. So it doesn't matter whether it's Ontario or Texas or Great Britain. There's something that should be helpful for you. In the handout, I've mainly given you website that are helpful to you. Hopefully that you find them useful and will be of value to you. So I'm going to start with vital statistics. So these are the births, deaths, and marriages that the government has collected. And in Saskatchewan, eHealth, it looks after the vital statistics. It has spent some time moving from pillar to post for a while, but it seems to be housed pretty nicely in eHealth. As with most provinces, states, and countries for that matter, you can do an online query and then order a registration document for a small fee, and that small fee in Saskatchewan is $55. Generally, the death records, for if you're ordering a genealogy copy, the data or the reason for death is stroked out, or at least it is in some locations. I've not actually ordered one from Saskatchewan, but I expect that to be the case. When you go to the website, and this applies for other jurisdictions as well, make sure you read the information. Go into the help part of it and read and see what you're getting and what might not be provided in what you're ordering. The book I refer to in the handout, The Tracing Your Saskatchewan Ancestors, gives you some ideas on some of the questions in some of the years, because the questions changed over the years. And so, you know, a death or a birth certificate that you ordered from, you know, 1901 will have different information in it than the one that you ordered from 1945. Okay. Do your homework in that regard. For me, I've sometimes found that, at least in collateral lines, the information that the index provides is sufficient for my purposes. But I certainly have ordered documents, and places like Ontario actually have them online with Ancestry. In Saskatchewan, deaths over 100 years, or births over 100 years, deaths over 70 years, and marriages over 75 years are available for genealogy purposes. Okay. And of course, you'll see here that the marriages haven't been indexed. They're currently working on deaths in the 40s. There's a few of them. And actually, they don't have the births for 100 years either. They're up to 1919. I would suspect that if you had a more recent death, you know, something in the late 40s, or marriages that were, say, 70 years old, that it would be worth your $55 to send in and ask for a copy of the event, because likely the newer ones, there's more likely that the event is recorded. Other locations, other jurisdictions, the dates that they use aren't always the same as this. So sometimes, generally the births are 100 years, but sometimes the deaths and marriages are a different age. So check their website or their information so that you can find out what's available. When you go into eHealth and want to do a query, this is the screen that you get. And this is similar to the one I most often use. The one I most often use is the Manitoba one, of course, because that's where my family is mainly from. It's very similar to this. So you can plug in a name, you can plug in a last name, a first name, a place, in this case, and a date. And you can use any combination of those, okay? If you're not sure about what the child's name is, you can put in the last name and the year and see if the information is there, okay? Although the acts were actually requiring people to do them in the late 1800s or 1880s, probably they're not really complete until the 1920s. So you can't just necessarily count on the fact that just because they were supposed to register that they have. And in Saskatchewan here, there are some births as early as 1867. By 1885, I found that there were 256 births that are registered. I suspect they're late registrations, somebody wanting to get their CPP or something, or another reason for getting a document. By 1913, there were 20,000 births. And the last year is 1919, that's in the index, and there is over 25,000 births. So there is a lot of information there for births. Deaths, not so much. Hopefully it's because there haven't been as many people died in Saskatchewan as there has been births. I'm not sure. There are a few in the late 1880s and a few more in the 1890s. By 1900, there was over 500 deaths registered. And of course, in 1918, there was over 1,000, which I suspect is probably because of the flu. Because the remaining years, there's been less than 1,000. There's a few indexed for all the 1940s, but I suspect because they are 20 or 35 or 17 in all those years, they haven't actually got indexing them yet. I suspect that those are ones that people have asked for and they've just added them to the index. The other day, I have Find My Past linked into my legacy program. And I got a clue from Find My Past about Saskatchewan vital stat. So I'm thinking that Saskatchewan has sold their index that they do have to find my past. I haven't proven it, but I certainly got a clue, and it was one that was accurate. So when you do a query on births, this is the screen that you get. And I think this is a particularly good screen because you've got the child, when they were born, where they were born, the date, their names, and you've got both the mother and the father. So when I use Manitoba's information, I don't get the father at all, and I have to go to another screen to get the mother. So it's a lot more tedious work. You'll notice that the location, sometimes it's a place, a town, and sometimes, a lot of times, it's the land location. Okay. And I'm going to suggest that just because you've got one family, they probably aren't always showing the same location, sometimes even within the family. Now, that may be because they've moved off the farm and into town, or someone put different information in. You'll see that second last, this William here. I would think that his last name should be Woolley. Whereas you see that he has been listed in the registration as Woolly. I suspect that's either an indexing error or an error in being able to read the writing and understand the writing. So in that case, if you have a family of Wooleys that you're looking up, and you know that William was born even in 1915, you are not going to find him by putting in the last name of Woolley, Woolley. Okay, so in that case, what you would do is you would type in a WO, and maybe if you knew the year of birth, you could put in 1915, and that might bring him up. Or you could just put in the WO or WOO and see if you can find him that way. So that same thing applies elsewhere. Okay, so make sure that you use a variety of methods of trying to find your person. Don't expect that it's going to be exactly right. I would never have spelt Alexander that way. I'm thinking that it might be Alexander, but that might be a middle name that is part of the family name. Some registrations for birth are done after the fact, and it's not as evident on this screen other than the numbers. When I looked at some of those early 1800 births, some of them had quite large numbers. And so I'm thinking that that's an indication that they were late registrations. In Manitoba, it shows part of the registration number that you get has got the year that it was registered in. And so in my paternal grandmother's family of 8, only 2 of them were registered at the time of the birth. So the others had to register themselves when they wanted to get a birth certificate. So my grandmother did hers in 1951. A couple of her siblings didn't do theirs till the 1970s. And these are folks that were born 1902 to 1913 range. So by then it was fairly common in Manitoba that it was being used. So some of that may be the case in Saskatchewan as well. And so information might be slightly different than what you were expecting, because they had to fill out a form and get somebody to verify that they really were who they said they were and that they were born in such and such a place. This is what the death registrations look like. So they, in some ways, they have good information. They've got the name, they've got the date of death, and they've got the place of death. But you'll see this is the hospital. It doesn't say what town it's in. Okay, so you need to have a bit of information about the location and what the hospital might have been. The one thing that I wish they'd put in here was the age at death, because if you've got a couple of different people with the same name, which certainly happened, you're going to have a hard time deciding which one for $55. If you're thinking of ordering a death certificate, note that death certificates are probably the most inaccurate of any of the documents that you get. Certainly all the documents stand a chance of having an error in them, but death certificates in particular, because at the time of the death, maybe it was a neighbor or a friend, a relative that wasn't really close that filled out the information, and they maybe didn't have a clue and they just made it up as they went along. So there was these blocks to fill in because it was a government. Just because it was a government form doesn't mean it's accurate. So be careful of death certificates. It would be my warning. As with other certificates, make sure that you review all these forms, the birth certificates, the death, and for that matter, any other information that you get. Review it periodically. Make sure that you go back to a document that you got a number of years ago and look at it with fresh eyes. Okay. You've grown your tree, you've gotten more information, and the information that was on that form, maybe the religion of the parents that didn't matter when you got the form, now is a good clue where to go to a church that might have extra information on the next generation. So make sure that you review your documents from time to time. This one I threw in because I think that this is something that there's a group of people for whom this is kind of important. It's more current people, but if you're trying to find collateral lines and so on, there has been for a number of years a process for legally changing your name. And the SGS has put together an index of the name changes that have been published in the Saskatchewan Gazette since 1917, from 1917 to 1950. And it's actually on their database, it's online, so you can go into SGS and have a look at that. This is where a person legally changed their name. This is not what happens when a woman gets married. That's not part of this process, okay? I know that when we were living up north, we would get a copy of the Saskatchewan Gazette every 2 weeks, I think it was at one point in time. And it was very interesting to see the names and wonder why a person changed their name. Some of them were obvious, they took off the SKI off of a name, or changed the spelling a little bit because they were having trouble when they were having to give their name. But others were completely different names. I always wondered why they were doing that. So it's certainly a valuable tool for those who have lost people, and maybe what they did is they changed their name and moved on. Okay, the next topic that I've got is the fraternal groups and organizations that might add some value to your family tree. So this is an example of the kinds of organizations that have been out there. There's certainly lots more than that. I would suggest start with your current family and see if you can find out what groups and organizations they belong to. In my family, both my mother and grandparents and a great grandmother belonged to the Rebecca Lodge, part of the Oddfellow organization, whereas my sister-in-law's family, they belong to the Eastern Star, and which is part of the Masons group. So find out to start with, find out what organizations your ancestors belong to. Some of them were secret lodges, some of them were religious organizations, some of them were ethnic organizations. So there's quite a wide range of groups out there. Where to find the groups? So most community history books have a section on the organizations that were part of the community. Now, they may not provide the name of your ancestor in it, but at least you know the kind of things that the group did, and you may in fact find your ancestors mentioned in it. Newspapers, certainly organizations reported on activities they were doing, teas they were doing, or even meetings that they were doing, that kind of thing. So check it and see in the community, in the local newspapers. You may also see signs of it on their cemetery stones. Okay. As groups have died out in smaller communities, at least, check out the local museum or library. When the group was dissolving, someone at some point wanted to clear the information out of their house, or they had to give up their meeting place. And so the local museum was often a spot where documents could be held. And even if they don't have lots of documents, they often do have pictures. So check the local museums. Some of it has gone to archives. I know the Saskatchewan Archives has some for different groups. And then other organizations will have sent it to a head group in the capital, like in Regina, or some of them would have gone down to Ottawa or Toronto, where there was a head group. So have a look at that. And even if you can't find that, it wouldn't hurt to look up the online, the organization online, and see what they were involved in, the kinds of things. Cindy's List has an area where you can look at groups. My feeling is, even if you don't find out what your particular ancestor did, you can certainly at least find out something about the organization and understand why your ancestor might have joined, and get some insight into the kind of person they were. So I think it just adds some interest to your family tree, particularly if you're writing out a book. So newspapers, they would be my passion. I don't even deny it. Just a second here, I've just gone through. Certainly, it's something that I started using a lot of years ago. I was given a portable microphone reader when we lived up north. And so when we got to the Flin Flon area, I went to the library and was able to borrow some used papers from the area where my father's family came from, and was able to go through the community news and find out about my great grandfather going and shooting ducks with his brothers and so on. So you got a sense that there was still some ties back to the old family. So I've really been hooked on newspapers. I think they're the greatest thing. And newspapers were really important to our ancestors. It kept them informed on what was going on in the world. There they were out in the middle of nowhere in a house with nothing. Certainly there was no TV, no radio, no cell phones. So they provided a lifeline back to the world at large, and to the communities that they came from. And even to the people in the community themselves where they were living, because of course they didn't get out to events like we tend to do, used to tend to do. It provided birth announcements, wedding announcements, engagements, death announcements, and these are all things that I'm sure all of you have used newspapers for. They're a resource for dates that aren't in vital stats. You might be lucky enough to get a photo of your ancestor. Lots of engagements had photos. Sports events had photos. Certainly, those who were in trouble in the law sometimes had photos in there. So, the community news in particular is helpful in filling out your tree. They provide information on holidays, visits, visitors. They give you locations of family members where children have scattered to after they were married. Information on groups that your ancestors were part of. They help you identify the fraternal groups that they were part of. Even medical issues were often part of the community news. You know, why was your person in the hospital and for how long, that kind of thing. Information on community events, who was the best baker or produced the best flowers in the fair, who was in trouble with the law, and the events that had happened and were going to happen in the area. I found I was following a collateral line a while back and had gotten this family in a couple different censuses and happened to be into the newspaper and realized that one of the daughters that it was listed as a daughter in the census was actually the child of a brother who had come to visit. And they identified that this brother had come from another state to visit and to visit with his daughter who was living with his brother and his family. So I would never have identified this other girl as not belonging to that family. Her age fit in nicely with the rest of the kids. And so it was the newspaper that gave me information about that. All the newspapers also were great for helping farmers and housewives develop new methods of work and new recipes and new ways of doing things. So again, some of that information that helps grow your family and what they were doing at the time. Of course, obituaries are a big thing with genealogy. Something that probably everybody has got in their package. They can vary in size and information. They can provide great information on hobbies, occupations, interests, those kinds of things. They also provide great information, if they're of any size at least, on siblings, parents, even grandparents, who survived them, who predeceased them, in locations, and certainly not all locations do this, and not all at all times. If there are pallbearers mentioned, perhaps they're relatives like grandsons or nephews. Often it's a way of getting a new name. Note the funeral home, because the funeral home can provide you with some extra information if you need. The cemetery as well, either to go to find a grave in case it's there, but other members of the family are probably in that same cemetery. So you might be able to tie in with other relatives. Know though that, as with all newspaper information, it may not be totally accurate. Okay, the deceased wasn't the person, for the most part, who completed the obituary. That's changing to some extent. I'm thinking of years, but again, depends who wrote the obituary and what they felt was necessary to provide to the community at large. Okay. the whole thing about newspapers is that it's only as accurate as the informant, and as well the person who set the type. I know I got going through a local paper where where I was born and family was born, and found a birth announcement for my brother, and it was off by a date that I thought, and I went to my program and looked, and yeah, oh my goodness, maybe I've got the wrong date, but no, the newspaper was wrong. So if in doubt, question the newspaper, I'm going to suggest, if you've got a better valuable source. There's a couple of different ways of that we have for using newspapers. And the first one is the one that has always been there, and that is going through the reels of microfilm. Okay. SGS has a few reels of newspapers. I noticed they have a few copies of the Northerner paper, which for the North, while I was living there would have been great information on people who were living there at that time, and some of the local people as well. Okay. But they've got a few others as well, but just a few. Certainly the Saskatchewan Archives has got a great collection of Saskatchewan newspapers that you can go through. Certainly not all the newspapers and not all the editions, but certainly a large collection. You can find online sites that provide you with resources for newspapers. Certainly Genealogy. Dave Obie's got a great list of resources where you can get newspapers for the provinces. Universities often have a collection that's online that you can scroll through. Chronicling America, if you're doing America research, is great. Even Google News Archives. Have a look there for something if it's more recent. The Ancestor Hunt, similar to Dave Obie, have got a list of resources for newspapers that a person can go to, and includes more of the US kind of thing, and so on. So look them up. It's more tedious than just filling in the blank, but it certainly is of value. When you're doing this, make sure that you take a bit of time and figure out how the newspaper is laid out. Generally speaking, once a layout is established, they use it for quite a long period of time. So often the first page will be the news of the day, whether that's something that's happening in the country, the province, or whether it's something in the community that's noteworthy. Okay. And that's the first page or two. The last pages or two, depending on how big of a newspaper you've got, tends to be the death notices, the things that are for sale, that kind of thing. And in the middle, we've got the community news. And so generally, a newspaper puts them in a certain order at a certain period of time. So once you get going through the pages, you know that you go to the next day of the newspaper, and you go page, and you get to about page 4, and you start sort of looking more carefully for your community. So it's not really as tedious as you think, and it doesn't take quite as much time as it takes. And for some papers, that's the only way you can use them, and it certainly works really well. The other way, of course, is spending a bit of money and getting a subscription to a place that has digitized the papers. Okay. Now, the problem with this is not all papers have been digitized. And so you may not find your local paper in these groups. You plug in a name, your name pops up, and there's your information. Okay. Before you pay your money, go into their catalog, which you can do without paying, and see what papers they have. Different companies have got different papers. Some of them have got the same papers, but I've used all of these at times. And at the current time, I've got a newspaper.com and a newspaperarchive.com subscription, short subscription. And I find that for some places, I use the one, and for some places, I use the other. So my Manitoba paper that I like, that's the local paper that I grew up with, it's in newspapers.com or newspaperarchive.com. It's there, it's clearly done, it's always there. But if I'm looking for my Ontario relatives that are down in that Windsor area, I have to go to newspapers.com. BC, sort of a mixture. It's often in newspapers.com, but sometimes it's in the archives. So check it out. They list the papers that they have. They list the years that they have for them, because just because they have your paper, if they've only got 2 years, then, and they're not the 2 years that you have ancestors there, then that's not going to be of value. Make sure you make use of, once you get your subscription, make use of the advanced search function. Just plugging in the first name and the last name, maybe it's not going to give you exactly. Maybe you've got a name like my when I plug in my name like Tibbets, other than a spelling error, it's not that common a name where I've been looking, and so I can do that. I can not even type in a first name, and I can just go through and sort out the people that I want to look at. But when I look at I've got a name of Cousins, Cosens, and sometimes it gets misinterpreted for something else. And so I need to put in, and in some locations I've had trouble with the fact that they've named a street in that town after one of my relatives. So I have to go in and say, I don't want something that shows street in there. I want to show Cousins, but I don't want to show street. So if it's got street in there, don't show me that one. So spend some time and use the search function. You'll find that depending on the years, your person may be known as Mrs. John Smith, not Sarah Smith. So you may have to look up more male names than female names. Certainly for my grandmother, she was. They often have her in the paper as Mrs. C.P. Tibbets. So it's not even the first name of my grandfather, it's his initials. And so fiddle around with it and take some time with it. The other thing you should be doing is looking, at the next largest center. In earlier years, lots of times obituaries, marriage announcements, engagements, and so on, even birth announcements were also sent to the larger center. So just because your local Saskatchewan paper hasn't been digitized, the Leader Post is, or the the Star Phoenix. And so go through them and see if your folks sent their information into the larger center, because people often in other communities would buy the local the larger center paper just to keep track of what other people were doing in the province. And so there are lots of the small town announcements in those papers. So check them out as well. The other thing, I've got the husband's name for the wife, but don't forget that people often had nicknames in the old days. Particularly, I've got a set of Gunn family that were from the Selkirk area, And of course, there were lots of Angus guns and there were lots of Donald guns and so on. But sometimes they got to be Long Angus or Donald Senior or so on. So make sure that you try throwing in nicknames as well. So this is a piece out of a local newspaper. So it's not the leader post or whatever, but this is an example of where you might find stuff. So you'll see it talks about the Foxhorn Legion Auxiliary having a meeting, a very small meeting, and that they weren't going to have one in August. So if this paper is in one of your pay sites, you could fill in as a name within parentheses Foxhorn Legion Auxiliary, and that will pull up any news articles that has that in it. Okay, and so perhaps in some of their other meetings, they actually listed your ancestor. Then we have an obituary. So in this particular one, we see when he died. This was 1966, this particular paper. When he died, how old he was, his full name, the maiden name of his wife, where he was born, the fact that he was he enlisted in World War I, was a farmer. He's survived by a son and two sisters, which of course in the proper sense of time, we don't have their first names, but you may be able to then go to the vital stats and look up Laycock, C. Laycock, or William Reed, and you might find their marriage. And then you'll know what, and you know that they're going to be a Hillcock. So, or you assuming that they're going to be a Hillcocks. Oops, sorry. And you'll see that we've got the cemetery. We've got, in this case, we've got the pallbearers, and you'll see that the active pallbearers were 6 nephews. Now, Alex Reed and Garnet Reed would have been ancestries, but I happen to know in this case that these other gentlemen that are listed here are not actually nephews. They're actually spouses of his wife's nieces. So not in his family line at all. So be careful of how you interpret the information. You'll see in the center file column that we've got a house for sale, and you'll see it's the house of the late Dorothy Kenwood. So you maybe hadn't gotten an obituary for her, but suddenly there, at least by July of 1966, she has died. So she died before then. So now someone is selling her house. And the other thing that they have, at least in Manitoba, and I can't tell you that I've found them in Saskatchewan, but I haven't done as many papers, I will be honest and say, in Saskatchewan, but notice to creditors. So when a person died and people were doing up the will, they needed to announce that the person had died, and if anybody had any bills that hadn't been paid, that they should be in touch with the solicitor. So that's another way of finding out without having an obituary that someone has passed away. So this is the last, so I'm just about done here. This is sort of an example of what I've used, where I've used most of what I've given you today, although not so much the group stuff. I have this family that I have been interested in, even though they're not really quite relatives, in fact. This Michael Coyne and Jessie Murray got married in 1883. So I knew that they'd gotten married. I went into the archives and found all of their 13 children that they had between 1884 and 1903. And so then I happened to be in the newspaper and found in 1905, I found this marriage of Violet Coyne to, and I had been looking up the husband, that the person that she married, because he in fact is part of my ancestor line. And so I found that this was their marriage, and it said, owing to the death of the bride's mother a few months ago, only immediate family were present. So I'm going, oh dear. So that is in January of 1905. So I went back to the newspaper and found out in November that Mrs. Coyne had been deathly ill. So this was in late November. Went to the archives and found out that in fact she had died the day before Christmas in 1904. Not sure what, I didn't order the certificate, so I'm not sure what she died of. So I then went into the newspaper to see what Michael was doing. And in 1906, in March, he has an auction sale. So he's got 16 horses, not sure how many, but maybe 18 or so cattle. He's got a lot of cattle. He's got implements. He's even selling household things, and 6 improved quarters. Okay. Obviously, he didn't sell his land, because in May of the next year, he offered a section of it for sale. He talks about how it's fenced and how much is ready for crop and so on. And then I know he headed back to Ireland. He was from Ireland, and he headed back to Ireland. And some of the kids stayed here, and some of them went back to Ireland with them. But it was interesting to have used, you know, sometimes you need the newspaper, sometimes you need the vital stats, and so on. So that is my talk on these topics. Certainly there are topics that I think all of us have used and probably will be using again. And hopefully I've provided you with a little bit of information that's helpful. Okay, now do I stop sharing, Dan?
You can if you like, Jean. It doesn't matter.
Or I can go into the chat.
You sure can. There's a few questions in there. There's I think the first 2 are on the vital stats part of your presentation. And Jason asks, can we assume incorrect spelling is due to entry error by clerks? Sometimes I have found that the same last name is on the page and even right above each other, but spelled differently.
Well, for sure in death certificates, you could assume either way. Births should be the same, but it depends on the literacy of the father. I mean, if the father isn't actually filling out the form, if he's just providing whoever is filling out the form with the information, certainly it can be a spelling mistake on the form, or an index error. So it could be either. I would agree. It certainly could be either.
Okay. Shirley asks, why are you not provided a cause of death from 1892? It's well over 100 years.
Well, and I think that if you go back to them and talk about it with them, you should be able to get a copy. But that has been the practice in the past. If you want an actual registration copy, like you would get if you needed to get the one for doing estate transactions and so on, like you might have to get a different form. I didn't read the Saskatchewan stuff in detail, I have to admit, but as I was reading it through, it didn't look to me like the cost was any different for a genealogical purposes or the other purposes. But I'm thinking for the other purposes, you need to prove that you are part of that person, that that was your great grandfather. In previous times, I would have sent it in and said, I need the cause of death for medical reasons. And then you would be able to get a copy. But traditionally, they haven't given the cause of death on death certificates for genealogy purposes.
Okay, Jason has another question. Did you use an online newspaper database to find all these connected articles, or did you have to go through hours of microfilm to find them?
The one that I showed you was online. Absolutely, it was. I'll be first to admit that it was. But no, I have used the reeling thing, and I've actually used some of the online ones as well. And you know, it just takes a little bit more time. But like I say, you become familiar with the paper as you use it and as you go through it, and they are set up pretty similar from one week to another, because the pay sites, they're not totally accurate in providing you with the information, because sometimes the process that they use for creating the dots that make up the typing, sometimes the computer doesn't read the information very well, and so depending on the how old the paper is, you know, sometimes O's and E's. I've had a problem looking up using that way. I've had a problem looking up certain names because it changes an L to an exclamation mark, and I haven't put an exclamation mark in my name, but it's seeing that, and so it's not totally the answer either. But no, the ones that I gave you today, totally I did from my site. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Eileen. Now.
Mm-hmm.
Eileen says, I've several ladies that were born with one Christian name, and by the time they married, they had added a couple more or revised their first name. Would they appear on name changes?
Only if they did it legally. I mean, lots of us have changed our name and not changed it legally. I have a spouse who has 3 given names and uses the middle name and never uses the other one, even on legal documents. Now, is he going to get into trouble someday? Perhaps, but like he's not legally changed it, and certainly I would suspect that if someone has just added an extra name, and particularly a woman, depending on the years, I'm suggesting not likely legally changing it. But it doesn't hurt to check. SGS has it on their website. It's easy enough to check and see. But I'm thinking not likely.
And I'll just mention that the name changes now goes up to 1970 too.
Oh, very good. Sorry.
So
yeah.
A little bit more added on there. So
yeah, it was really interesting watching the papers come in and trying to decide why a person, you know, a lady and her children changed their names. Okay, they've left a spouse, you know, the spelling to make more sense for ease of use makes sense, but some of them really different.
Yeah.
I see somebody says that Ancestor Hunt is not working. Wasn't in there today, but maybe the link that I gave, maybe.
I just added the link that I had to.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah.
So that's good. Are
Uh,
there, oh, just missing the .com, Alfred said, so.
Oh, yeah, 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 okay.
Are
Yeah,
there any
no,
more questions? Sorry, I interrupted you, Jean.
Nope, nope, that's good. Hopefully somebody got a tidbit or two out of it today and yeah. I'm not the know-all, but
Every little bit helps.
yeah,
For sure.
yeah, always something good.
Yes. Okay, I see no more questions in the chat, so we'll say thank you, Jean, for that. And there's
Okay.
a lot of valuable hints and a lot of hunting and searching for everyone to do there. So
Okay.
thank you for your presentation.
Great.
I'll just mention a couple of events coming up that SGS has. And our next chat with the genealogist in partnership with CCSG will be on Saturday, March 12th. And it's Churches, Funeral Homes, and Cemeteries by Laura Hanowski. And the next weekend, actually, we have a presentation by Dave Obey titled Decoding the Dash. So more information on both of those events is on the website. If you want to register, they are there. So, and if you have any questions, you can certainly give our office a call. And just to mark your calendars, the annual general meeting for SGS is coming up on April 23rd, and it will be held via Zoom again this year. And we have a guest presenter that will follow the meeting portion of the event, and she will be doing a presentation on organization. And I'm sure we all look for ways to do that a little better with all the paper and files that we have. So should be an interesting presentation. So once again, thank you, Jean, and thanks to everyone for coming out this morning, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.